Okay, and welcome to the University of Lethbridge. Our university's Blackfoot name is Inixcum, meaning Sacred Buffalo Stone. The university is located in traditional Blackfoot Confederacy territory. We honor the Blackfoot people and their traditional ways of knowing and caring for this land, as well as all Indigenous peoples who have helped shape and continue to strengthen our university's community. I'm Hannah Thomas, the Graduate Recruitment Officer with the School of Graduate Studies. I'm excited to welcome you to this evening's webinar on tips on securing a supervisor. Our goal is to provide you with a clear and practical roadmap to successfully connecting with a potential supervisor. I'd like to start by introducing our esteemed panelists. We have with us Dr. Mark Rousseau, Associate Dean of the School of Graduate Studies and Professor with the Faculty of Arts and Science in the Chemistry and Biochemistry Department. Dr. Craig Coburn, Professor with the Faculty of Arts and Science in the Geography and Environmental Department. Dr. Christopher Eplett, Associate Professor with the Faculty of Arts and Science in the History Department. And Dr. Jamal Mansour, Associate Professor with the Faculty of Arts and Science in the Psychology Department. We'll begin with frequently asked questions for our panelists on securing a supervisor, followed by a live Q&A segment. Please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section at any time, and we will try and respond at the end or during the session. Thank you all for being here. And with that, we'll get started with our first question for the panelists. Okay, so when a prospective student emails a potential supervisor, what details should they include to make a strong first impression? And are there any specific documents they should attach? Mark, you want to start with this one?
Sure. I think the most important thing is that it should be clear from your email that you've actually looked at the kind of research that the person you're contacting does, and that you are a good fit for that program. We all have, I shouldn't say all, but the vast majority of us have a web page where our research interests are pretty clearly laid out. And if you are looking for somebody who doesn't sound like the research that I do, you'll get, well, in my case, you'll get an answer. In a lot of cases, people won't even answer the emails, but you'll get a pretty short answer that says, we're not a good fit, look somewhere else. So it's really important. So this is really important, and it doesn't matter if you're applying to the U of L or elsewhere. If you're contacting a faculty member somewhere, you have to have done your research first. If you haven't done your research, and it's pretty clear from your email that you haven't done your research, like I said, you'll either get no or a very short answer. In terms of documents, personally, I like to see a resume or a CV, and I like to see a transcript. Not so much because I want to see your grades. I do want to see your grades, but I kind of want to see what you've actually studied so far. Having said that, I don't care if you attach that with your initial contact. In fact, you could easily wait till, if I'm interested, I'll ask for them, I guess is what I'd say to that. I'm not sure if the others feel differently about that, but, personally, your first email, the big thing is to show that you've actually done your research and you actually have some interest in what I do. I'll say maybe one more thing. It's really important that what we get from you is sincere. If you get involved in an area of research, if you pass all of the screens and you get admitted to my research group, and it turns out you're really not interested in the work I do, you're not going to be very happy. Trying to beat yourself, as a square peg into a round hole. So, really look for somebody where there's a good fit between the things you're interested in and the things that the faculty member does.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that. Jamal, do you want to
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would definitely agree with what Mark has said. I certainly would prefer not to get documents on that initial contact email because I'm conscious that students are probably contacting multiple people, and it's actually a lot of work to be constantly attaching things. So I think in that first reach out email where a student is getting in touch with me, I do want to see, like Mark, that they're interested in working on research that I'm interested in. So, fit is absolutely the first thing I'm looking for in that email. And not just that the student has read my webpage and says, I'm interested in X, Y, and Z. And those are three phrases that they just pulled off of my website. What really stands out is a student who's obviously gone and looked at some of the research that I'm doing by looking at least the abstracts of some of those articles and is said, oh, yeah, I'm interested in this aspect of your research or something along those lines. And I'm looking on top of that for them to give me some indication that they have the skills that are going to be so that speaks to fit, but then I'm also looking for an indication that they have the skills that are going to make them competitive for a position in my lab. So have they got a psychology degree in my case? Have they done any research in the past? Are they do they have some knowledge of the related relevant to the area that we'd be researching? So I'm also looking for some indication that they're going to be come in with some skills that are going to help them be successful. And sometimes students have those, and sometimes students have some of those, and sometimes students have more. But it just depends on the year how competitive you're going to be with whatever skills you have. But expressing those is really important. And then, like Mark, I do I want to see, I want some indication that you're bright enough that to be successful. So I'm not looking for someone to share their transcript with me, but I do find it's helpful mostly for the students if they give me an idea of what their GPA is so that I can give them an idea of whether or not that's likely to make them competitive for a position in my lab. So it more saves them time, I think, because then I can tell you right away, you're unlikely to have a shot, or let's continue the conversation.
Good. Thank you so much, Jamal. Craig, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add to what's been said already. I think it's fairly clear. I mean, the thing that I get most frequently that's off-putting is the person that's gone and grabbed a few keywords and, I clearly fit with your research program, and there's no chance there's a fit there at all. Their degree doesn't match their actual things that they like. They'll say that at the start, and it's a disingenuous statement, and then the rest of it will more clearly articulate who they are. And I'm like, I'm not interested. So I get it. It's difficult to secure a supervisor. In our system, securing a supervisor for one of the research intensive degrees is paramount. So you have to do that on entry for most programs. But being honest and being truthful about those things, and don't pepper the entire department. Like many students do that. So every single person in that department's getting the same email with the top changed. Pay attention to your details. Like the font change at the start's usually the tip. You know, I've even had it where like the color is different, and you're like, oh my goodness, those aren't going to impress. And all the rest that's been said, yeah. I mean, it's you're starting a conversation. The other thing is look for supervisors who are advertising. So if I'm not advertising for a position, if I say I'm busy recruiting master's students for a certain thing, or PhD students or a postdoc or something, then like the door's open. Please apply. If I'm not, then it is a bit of a shot in the dark. So
Thanks, Greg. That's a really good pointer about ensuring that your actual email is done properly and not just a copy and paste of all previously done email that you've been sending out mass. Chris, anything more to add?
Not really. I agree, of course, with what, excuse me, with what my colleagues have already said. I would just reiterate, be specific in your initial email. I'm not saying it has to be 15 pages long or what have you, but you know, in my case, don't just say in broad terms why you might want to do a history MA. Tell me specifically in a sentence or two at the very least why you want to do an MA with me. How do my research interests align with yours and so forth?
Thanks, Chris. And since we'll start with you for the next question, Chris.
Do you
How
mind-
Oh, okay.
how can students best
Do
demonstrate
you mind if I
that
add a
their
couple of things
research?
first, Hannah?
Oh, sure, yes.
Yeah.
Sure, go
So,
ahead.
Jamal said something really interesting about, talking about, and a specific interest. I think, I think be as specific as you can, but I mean, in my particular case, for example, that a student has figured out that I'm working in mathematical biology and actually expresses an interest in mathematical biology and tells me something about the fact that they know what that is, they've got maybe a little bit of background, or at least they know something enough about it to be able to say why they're interested. That would be enough. Like drilling down into my papers, it's great if you do that, but kind of you need to show that you understand what I do. That's the biggest failing, I think, more than kind of getting really specific. On the question of GPA, that's a little bit complicated. Personally, what I do when we get farther into the conversation, I ask for transcripts and I send them for an evaluation, because the way we calculate GPA for admission is a little bit complicated. And whatever you think your GPA is at your institution is probably not the number we're going to use here, just because of what we do. So just to give the attendees a bit of an idea, for a master's degree, for people applying for a master's degree, we use, roughly speaking, the last 2 years of your undergraduate degree to calculate your GPA. There's a formula of exactly how we do that, so you can't do it yourself. I've been doing it myself for a while, and now I'm often a little bit at variance from what the registrar's office calculates. It's not the simplest thing. Giving me some idea, kind of where you sit in your class, right? That's okay. But kind of there's so many GPA systems out there. There's so many scoring systems out there. It's sometimes a little hard to figure that out. And maybe kind of following up on Craig's comment about advertising, not all faculty members advertise. So I wouldn't I mean, if you see an ad, then that's a clear indication that that's somebody that you might want to contact. But if you don't, I wouldn't necessarily let that turn you off. If that's the area, if you really have an interest in the research area, I would go ahead and contact people. The worst that can happen is they say no.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to add, we don't do pre-assessments on GPA calculations. It's only done once you submit the application. So unfortunately, you would have to submit to get a guaranteed no, as in whether or not you meet that 3.0 GPA or not. But yeah, just to add to what Mark said and following up, and Chris will have you start as well, but how can students best demonstrate that their research interests align with the supervisor's work? So you've all spoke about just showing this alignment, but what's the best and effective way of conveying this?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I am speaking from the perspective of a historian, a member of the humanities, so I realize that my answer may differ somewhat from my colleagues who are in the sciences and so forth. But from my perspective, the best indicator of proper alignment or compatibility is previous coursework. Like, I'm an ancient historian, so I'm looking for MA students who have taken not just history classes in the past, but specific ancient history classes. And if they've actually taken a language like ancient Greek or Latin, that's icing on the cake. I would also look within those courses, assuming there was a writing component, and if they're history classes, there should be a writing component. But what did they write their essays on? Have they written papers on topics that overlap with my research interests in the past. And I would be particularly interested, again, from my perspective as a historian, any independent studies or major papers, honors theses and so forth they have written in the past, because to be able to write something like that, quite apart from the subject matter, which of course is quite relevant, being able to write something like that certainly demonstrates a high level of writing skill and so forth, which is definitely something I look for in a prospective MA student.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. So in terms of assessing the previous coursework, do you want them to initially provide their transcript then, or do you want them to just tell you what the courses is that they've completed?
If they want to initially, they can tell me informally. Like at some point, I'll be looking specifically at their transcripts and so forth. But yeah, even in that initial email, in line with what I said earlier about being specific, again, maybe in a couple sentences, just list some of the most relevant courses you've taken in the past, and what were some of the topics you wrote previous essays on, that sort of thing.
Thanks, Grace. Craig, do you have anything to add based on your sciences department?
Yeah, I guess, research alignment is quite important. Oftentimes the science elements are going to be aligned with research grants and other things. So having a degree of alignment that is shown is of course beneficial for that student in gaining access. But for me, it usually very much, as Chris has indicated, it will fall apart. You will say the correct things at the start of the email, which says, I've read your research. I find this inspiring, which I also find unbelievable. But then, carry on. And then you say right below that, you go, I did my undergraduate degree in a completely unrelated field, focusing on completely unrelated things. But I'm inspired by the remote sensing physics that you do, Craig. And I'm like, it's unlikely. So if you're not aligned, don't waste everyone's time. I mean, if you truthfully are, if you're inspired by or interested in the interesting areas that we find interesting, then those are the matches that are naturally made. That's so what you're trying to do is move me off of the, opening the email and giving it a bit of a yawn. Like, what makes me stop and read it, to be honest? Because I'm skimming these. I get one a day at the very least. I skim them and then I'm like, oh, hey, there's an interesting thing. Oh, you've done something that's right in line. That's interesting to me. It's so I think that in terms of disciplinary bounds, they're probably we're largely speaking similar in that regard.
Thanks, Craig. Jamal?
Yeah, I really think that there's a couple of things that I do the same thing as Craig. I skim the email and I look for some things to stand out. Things that stand out for me are, one, experience doing research in psychology, and being able to explain what the research you did was. Not like, and independent studies are a great way to get experience doing that. So that's one thing that would make it a student stand out. Another one is familiarity with my area, whether it's because you've read my research or you've read research about other people. But it really is, the thing that stands out is that you have given an genuine indication that you are interested in working with me on the things that I'm interested in. And it doesn't really matter how you kind of convey that, but I'm really looking, if I know that a student has emailed everybody in the department, then that person isn't, no matter what they've written, is an outright no, because that tells me they were disingenuous when they said, well, I'm interested in your paper. And maybe they've just gone and, looked up a title of a paper. So for me, there's a few flags, but there's also this, genuine, I'm excited about this area, or I have experience doing this and I'd like to do that.
Thanks. And we actually have a question in the Q&A that asks, can I email all the professors in the department? I'm interested in getting a supervisor. So that's a hard no from everyone. I'm assuming we don't email all the professors in the department, please. Alignment is key. Mark, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things. I mean, Chris touched on something in terms of coursework, relevant coursework. That's actually not a bad idea. Like, list 2 or 3, not too many. Like I've sometimes seen emails where they list 10 courses that cover most of their undergrad degree. But if you can list 2 or 3 courses that show that you actually understand what I do and what kinds of background I might value, that actually, shows you put a little bit of thought into it. In terms of emailing the whole department, if you write a good email to one person, and that person for whatever reason can't take you, but they think there's somebody else in the department, they will often, and certainly I do this, they'll often write back saying, right now, I don't know, I'm not taking students. I mean, it happens sometimes that my lab is full or my grant is all used up or whatever it is, but you might want to contact, this other person. So it's better to contact one person with a really well-crafted email that gets my attention enough that I'm not just going to send you back a thanks but no thanks email. And even if I can't take you at that particular time, I might recommend somebody else at that point. But if you blast it to the whole department, yeah, that's not going to work, because frankly, the amount of effort you would have to put into writing, in my department, I don't know, 10 or 12, well-crafted emails that target each person individually, you're not going to be doing that. And so you're going to be writing 10 or 12 really poorly targeted emails, and that's not going to work at all.
Yeah. And I think that will definitely fall into the next question, which is, what are some of the frequent mistakes students make when reaching out to potential supervisors, and how can they avoid these mistakes? Mark, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think we've kind of covered it in a way, right? I mean, it's the untargeted email that, doesn't connect with me that is going to get the quick no. I mean, sometimes the mistake that people make is so that's the number one mistake, right? It's just like a poorly targeted email. I mean, occasionally it's worse than just poorly targeted. It's kind of like, obviously I've occasionally received emails that were addressed to, Dr. I don't know, Smith or something, right? Like if you're sending a lot of emails and you're not careful about it, right? I mean, it's worse than not being targeted at that point, because, like you're not even getting the names right, so I'll go right back to that, think about who you really want to work with and craft an email for that person. And if you do that, then there's a good chance you'll get some kind of response.
Thanks, Mark. And I'll just jump to the next one and ask Chris to start with. It is, are there any critical do's and don'ts?
Can I jump in? I've got a couple of things to add to what Mark said there.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, yeah, echoing what Mark said, that, get the details right. I frequently am referred to as male by students who contact me, and that shows me they haven't looked at my webpage, right? So that is a huge red flag. But another red flag that Mark didn't mention for me is a very, very long email. So I think that when a student does a very long initial email, faculty are really busy, and you do want to put your best foot forward, but it's in your best interest to first make sure that they're aware that you have a good connection, and to say that concisely, because it's much easier for a faculty member to pick out that you're a good fit if you can say it concisely. But when we get these very, very long emails, you might actually be a good fit, but we don't see it because our eyes are not necessarily falling in the right places. So another red flag for me is a very long email.
Thanks. Any red flags for you guys, Craig, Chris?
Again, a lot of this I think we've already mentioned well, more in terms of what to do. A couple of things I would add off the top of my head. Don't be excessively colloquial. I know in this era of everyone texting people, sometimes formality is lost somewhat, but I'll just say, not always with prospective graduate students, but sometimes I have received emails that are way too colloquial when you are approaching a prospective supervisor. It's almost to the point of someone emailing me and saying, hey dude or whatever. So that that shouldn't be a problem for most people, I hope, but I have had it in the past. So, maintain the proper tone, I would say. And what was the other thing? It was just on the tip of my tongue. Oh, I know what it was. Sorry. Don't say in your email that, I've applied to several other places and already and being turned down. Like, don't say to your prospective supervisor or imply that they're basically your last resort. That is not, again, this is sort of a form or style issue, but that's not a good look either. So those are just two thoughts of mine that spring to mind.
Thanks, Chris. How about you, Craig?
Yeah, I don't have anything useful to contribute other than, if I was a student writing this letter, and I was at one point a student writing this letter, put yourself in the position of the reader. It's just an easier thing, and think, how would you like this done? You are trying to go to graduate school, you're trying to be taken seriously, you're trying to advance your career. These are all noble things, right? And if you do it with all seriousness and you do it with the utmost of professionalism, like default, like, as Chris is saying, I mean, if you're going to do anything, default to formality. I do get the informal, and I'm like, okay, well, this is already going in the wrong direction. If somebody doesn't reply to you, or if they're taking a long time to reply to you, and you keep prodding and poking them, that's also, I mean, again, at some point they're giving you an answer. I mean, I normally try to get back to students, but some people don't. And if they're not getting back to you, continuing to pester them is probably just more of a frustration for you. So that's another little communication bit, you know.
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe one more thing. I don't see this super often, but once in a while I'll receive one that where the quality of the writing is really, really poor. And I understand that, we get lots of international applicants for whom English is not their first language. But you do have to understand too that the graduate program here is in English. It will require you to write to a certain level. And so if you send me a letter that, and so what, I'll forgive, one or two little, idiosyncrasies of your writing. But if it's full of spelling mistakes and the grammar's really poor and the sentences, don't have periods and, I'm probably going to say no because I don't think you'll survive in our graduate program. So that's the other thing too. I mean, one of the things we're trying to assess isn't just, whether you're a good fit. Obviously, that's number one. But number two is, are you going to be successful here? And if you can't write in English to an acceptable level, you're not going to be successful here. And we don't want to put you in a position where you're going to come here and be unsuccessful.
Yeah, so we've spoken a lot about what you shouldn't do. In your experience, that's everyone, have you had, and can you give an example of a initial approach, an email that you received from a potential student that was very impressive and exhibited qualities that you wish everybody else would have emulated? Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, the ones that I am very attracted to speak to not only their alignment with what you may do or could supervise, but speak to their passion for a subject area. Like, those are the ones where that if you want to stop a person dead in their email and have them go, okay, I'm reading this one, then speak to what drives you towards that field, what attracts you to it, why you think it's interesting. Be a sentence or two, but that's something, I mean, I just read two that I got while the others were talking, and they're the most banal statements of, here are my qualifications. I do something in and around this area, yada, yada. You're not inspiring me. Inspire me. Why would I pick you out of the pile? So sell your passion for the things that you study.
Thanks, Greg. That's great. I love it. Inspire me. Jamal, you're agreeing? Do you want to be inspired as well?
I want to see that students are interested in my topic area and that they honestly are interested in that. But I don't necessarily like if what's going to get me to reply to you and say I'm interested, assuming I'm taking students that year, is that there's that alignment there in terms of interest and skill set. But then it's in the follow-up emails. Like I would with a student I'm considering, I'm going to engage in some correspondence with you about what your research project might look like, what your interests are. And I want students to be honest about those things for the reasons Mark said, is that we want you to be successful and you're not and happy, and you're not going to be successful or happy doing something that you're not actually interested in. And so I'm looking for in the subsequent emails that you're showing the knowledge you claim to have, the interest that you claim to have, that you're able to think analytically, so going beyond what we're corresponding about, and having some creativity and some analytic thought, like maybe we could do it this way, those sorts of things. That's going to really impress me.
Mark, how detailed should their research be in terms of what kind of level of preparation should they have? Just kind of piggybacking off what Jamal is saying.
So that'll vary a lot depending on who you're talking to. So that's a complicated question. So my colleagues in synthetic chemistry, for example, they're looking for people who've got a really good background in classical synthetic chemistry through coursework, for a master's through coursework, maybe some research exposure if possible, but not necessary. I'm kind of an oddball, and we have a few other oddballs around the university, in that my area of research is one that attracts people from lots of different fields. And I said this earlier, I mean, if you show enough awareness of what it is I do in your letter to list a couple or three courses that are actually relevant that you've taken. So for example, so because of the nature of my research and where I'm situated, I take students who've got backgrounds in chemistry, physics, mathematics. So they're a real variety. If a math student is writing to me, I'd like to know they've done some applied math, that they've got courses in differential equations or stochastic processes or something that's relevant to my research. If a chemistry student is writing to me, I'm looking for them to emphasize their kind of math and physical theory background, right? But they kind of have to, they have to make that connection. They have to actually be able to make that connection between what I do and what they offer. And then show, Craig was talking about passion, but also kind of a willingness to acknowledge that there's things they're going to need to learn, and maybe even say they're excited about learning. If they're coming from mathematics, that they're excited about learning some biology to go along with that, since I kind of work at that intersection, right? And again, genuineness, it comes through in spades if you're just writing what you think somebody wants to see. You really have to give me your most genuine self when you're writing these letters, or I will pick it up pretty quickly. And Jamal was talking about, kind of the ongoing correspondence. If I don't pick it up after the first email, I'll pick it up at the second email, or at some point I'm going to want to talk to you. I'm going to, kind of arrange for a Zoom discussion or something like that, and I'll pick it up at that point. So, I'm if you're really not interested in what I do, I will figure it out. But so, kind of, again, think about what you really want to do and how that aligns with the faculty members' interests. And if it's, if it involves learning something new, that's great. Just, tell me that you understand you'll be learning something new, and that, and that you're excited about that.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Mark. So I'm gonna jump into the Q&A, but before I do, capacity is a big thing, right? Not all professors are able to take on students for every year. So if a student doesn't receive a response or is turned down, what next steps should they take? Is it appropriate to follow up? Is it not appropriate to follow up? What should they do at that point? Yeah, Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, I think a follow-up is fine. I mean, I used to be the chair of the department and I would get well over 100 emails a day. Most of them actually needed me to look at them. Now that I'm no longer chair, I'm down to tens. When I was chair, it was, you know, and often with its international students, they may be coming in at odd hours and I get in the morning and my email is scrolling and you're trying to triage it and you might miss it. So having, sending that person I sent you an email the other day. I am a serious applicant. Um, okay, it's just a reminder. It's friendly. It's fine. Badgering, don't do that. But a friendly reminder is fine. I personally don't mind. It might be a personal preference thing, but it doesn't bother me at all.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I would basically agree with what Craig said. If you contact a potential supervisor, yeah, and you don't hear back from a week or so, then it's fine just to send a polite email to ask them, if they had a chance to look over your previous email or what have you. But yeah, in line with what was said previously, well, at that point, your prospective supervisor, if you've reached out to them a second time, then they should respond back to you. But if they do not respond to your emails and there's at all, then there is probably a reason for that. Namely, you haven't your initial email wasn't a good one. The prospective supervisor doesn't feel that your application was serious or that the student in question um, really or genuinely, and that's a word we've heard a lot previously, genuinely wants to work with you, and that's probably why they haven't responded back. But yeah, I think at least one follow-up email is perfectly acceptable.
Thanks, Chris. Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, not much. One follow-up email is just fine. Like Chris, I'd suggest waiting about a week. I have the same problem as Craig used to have, which is I'm an associate dean. So, my email box is insane. Sometimes it takes me a few days, even when I am going to answer something. Sometimes things just get lost in my inbox. Unfortunately, I hate to admit that. But you mentioned too, Hannah, about capacity. I mean, if it's strictly a capacity issue and otherwise your email looks pretty good to me, I will probably respond to those and let you know I just can't take you right now because I'm short of funds. I may suggest another way forward. So for example, I may suggest you apply for some specific scholarships, right? If I can think of one that you'd be eligible for. I may suggest you contact another faculty member. Occasionally, I even refer. I know I'm an associate dean in the School of Graduate Studies, and this is maybe not, but occasionally, kind of if your interests really don't square with anybody I know at the U of L, I may even say, hey, have you thought about contacting this person somewhere else, right? Because sometimes there's just no way it's going to happen. Once in a long, long while, I will tell a student, maybe try contacting me again next year, depending on what their situation is when they first contact me and what my situation is. That's relatively rare because I know students usually want to get on with things when they're contacting me. They're looking for a program, in the near future. But it does happen sometimes that a student is in a place where I can see them waiting a bit and me trying to, kind of waiting for some grant proposal or something to come through. So there's a bunch of different answers to that. But again, if you wrote a really good letter, I will probably answer it. And if I don't, like Chris said, tap me on the shoulder a week later.
Thanks, Mark. Jamel?
Yeah, speaking also to the capacity issue, it is the case that you can only supervise so many students. So when there is a good candidate, so when I get an email, I will, and I'm not accepting students, the first line you hear from me is, I'm sorry, I'm not accepting students. But I follow it up with a statement saying, this is kind of what is typical for a student to be competitive in my lab. And it's not necessarily research experience, to answer one of the questions in the Q&A, but it has to be something relevant. So, you know, awareness of the literature, some kind of independent study work where you delved into a topic, or some coursework that really got you excited, or some job experience, something. It doesn't necessarily have to be research. But if there's a student that I do think would be a good fit to my lab, but I don't have the capacity, I will also, like Mark, say, well, I think my colleague at this university might be taking students, or I will let them know when I might be able to take students again, so that they can make an informed decision and get in touch at that time.
Thanks, Jamal. So we're gonna try to quickly go through the Q&A. So somebody else, I'm just randomly starting here. Is there a time of year or semester that is best to reach out to potential supervisor, specifically in the sciences? Mark, do you wanna take that one?
Well, I'll answer that one a little more generally. So what you should do is go on the University of Lethbridge's Future Student website, look at the application deadlines, and think about, depending on where you're applying from, think about, you know, whether it's going to take a long time for you to get a study permit, even if you are admitted, and kind of work backwards from there, right? I mean, I personally, if you contact me 2 or 3 days before an application deadline, there's not much I can do, right? Because it just takes too long to put together an application. So you really do have to think about that a little bit. So in the sciences, our application deadlines are October 1st, January 15th, and May 1st. And if you're applying for, if you're a domestic student, you can apply to start in the next semester, right? So for example, if you apply January 15th, you could conceivably start on May 1st. But if you're an international student, unless you're in the US, which is about the only exception, well, maybe the UK, there's no way that's going to work. You need to apply much earlier than that. So if you apply January 15th, the earliest you could possibly start is September 1st. And sometimes even that's not long enough to get a study permit. The government has a website where you can check what the current visa processing times are for your country. And so I would encourage you to take a quick look at that. So think about when you want to start, when you would have to apply to start there, and then you need to contact people, you know, kind of a couple months before that, I would say is ideal.
Thanks, Mark. Somebody asked, how many times should I follow up on an initial email, and for how long should I wait to follow up? I think we answered this where we just pretty much said once and around a week after.
And can I add one more thing to Mark?
Yeah,
What Mark
sure.
said. So I agree with Mark. A couple of months is important, but when I am taking students, I probably have applications. Like there's probably, well, last time I interviewed 6 students. We do have to, you absolutely have to contact a potential supervisor before you apply, because we have to say yes or no that we're willing to accept the student. For me, that means I need to go through that kind of interview process where you have a back and forth email exchange. You talk to them over Zoom. You've had a chance to talk to their references. You look at their application thoroughly. So that's going to take some time. So if you don't get in touch months in advance, then you absolutely don't have a shot. So you need time for the supervisor, if they're considering multiple individuals, to be able to kind of sort through and say, yes, you're the one.
Thanks, Jamal. So we have someone that says, as someone who has been working for several years, 5, since completing their undergraduate degree, what would be the most effective approach to connect with and secure a potential supervisor? I'm particularly interested in hearing how mature students can bridge a gap between their professional experience and academic research interests. Does anybody want to take that one? Great, go for it.
Yeah, I've had that exact situation. So a couple of times, in fact, and it's not a problem. I mean, mature students, people with a few years worth of work experience, actually probably have a bit of a leg up, to be honest. You have a bit more, again, you have more actual work experience. So that usually is very helpful. There's nothing in there that would say, no, you can't do it. I mean, you do have to appreciate the challenge of going back to school as a mature student. So, you're accepting that. And if that's your goal and objective, we're there to help as much as we can. I mean, pay attention to all the detail that Mark just gave you, right? In terms of time that you need. I mean, students often underestimate that. If you're moving families and spouses, look at some of the current policies the government of Canada has with respect to that. Because some of these things are moving goalposts right now for us. But yeah, I've had great success with students that are coming back that are mature. So, and it's not a problem.
Go ahead, Mark.
So your work experience can be a huge asset, right? I mean, it shows that, especially if you have had, during that period of time that you were out of school, if some of your work experience was in one place for, an extended period of time. And I realized, a lot of people change jobs often these days, but if you had a couple of years somewhere, I mean, that shows that you're able to, stick somewhere and be successful. So that's great. There's one slightly tricky bit, which is that one of the things we're looking for and require, in fact, is that I think for science programs, for example, it's 2 of your 3 references have to be academic references. So you can get, a reference letter from one of your employers, or a past employer, but you also have to go back to talk to your old professors and get a couple letters from them. So that, of course, kind of after a few years, that becomes a little harder. So you're going to want to get in touch with people and back where you studied and see if they remember you. Hopefully they do, and they can write you a good reference letter. If obviously, kind of if as an undergrad you had some professor that you took a lot of courses with, or you had a research semester with them, or whatever it was, they're your number one person that you want to ask, right? But that's probably the trickiest thing for people who are coming back, other than the lifestyle adjustments that Craig mentioned.
Thanks, Mark. And I think this kind of goes in response to this person as well. I received a bachelor's and master's degree in agriculture and science, and I also have job experience of over 23 years in different business organizations. Am I eligible to apply to a MS or PhD program at your university? So it all depends on which program you're interested in and whether or not you meet the admission requirements for that program. And in terms of the supervisor, as we've mentioned before, it has to do with alignment, that you're reaching out to ensure that you are properly suited for that professor you're trying to make connection with. Somebody else asked, is it possible for a student who is newly diving into research field, I'm assuming that's field, does not have an existing research background, however, the degree studied is related to the supervisor area of research? Do you need a proposal to send to a supervisor, or how do we convince the supervisor that the student is interested? So I'm assuming there is not a straight line path for this prospective student, and they want to know how best to approach a supervisor based on a degree that they don't necessarily have in the field. Anybody want to take that one? Go ahead, Jamel.
Yeah, I think this is a totally reasonable question, because not everybody has a chance to get involved with research. But if you have the chance, do it, because it really sets you apart, and those skills are really helpful. But if you're newly diving into that field, doing some reading about the field, being aware of what some of the theories are, being aware of why it's consequential to the world, that really helps. Being able to hold a conversation about the topic it is really important. And if your degree studied is relevant, then you do have some of those relevant research skills. You know, like particularly, I can only really speak to the sciences, but research methods and statistics, for example, and just having an appreciation of how research is done is really useful. And you can really impress a supervisor by talking to them about the area and coming up with ideas for potential ways to do that research. And even if those ideas are not you know, perfectly thought out, you don't need to submit a long proposal. But I think showing the ability to learn and the specific interest will really go a long way for you.
Thank you so much, Jamal. Another person asked,
Do you mind if we
when-
just jump in really quick?
Oh, sure,
There was another
yeah.
part to that about the proposal. So in our program, you'll write a proposal after you enter the program. If you send me a proposal when you're just trying to find a supervisor, that may be problematic because your proposal will likely not align with the research that I'm doing. Again, it's kind of more showing me that you're interested in the field. I don't think it's a problem for a student not to have previous research experience. Obviously, it's an asset. You know, but there are lots of universities where the opportunities are limited. You're right. If you went to a big university, you know, kind of there's only so many of those opportunities to go around. There's way more students than there are opportunities. So we get that. And I should say the other thing is life circumstances matter, right? We also understand that, you know, their research opportunities are often you know, often require certain life choices as well, right? And some people you know, they have responsibilities to family that make it so that, for example, they can't take a summer research job. So, you know, I don't think that anybody will hold it against a student if they don't have research experience coming into, if they're applying to a master's degree. Like I said, if you do, it's an asset. But, you know, so I wouldn't let that deter you. And you know, in terms of the proposal, you'll write that after you get here, right? We'll talk about projects at some point, and we'll send you off to do some reading and some thinking, and we'll work out a proposal.
Thanks, Mark. So this person asks 2 questions. When during the application process do we contact a potential supervisor? Prior to you submitting the application, you need to have your supervisor secured. Then they ask, can we find a supervisor in another department? For example, a psych counseling MA with a neuroscience supervisor. Jamal, do you wanna- or Mark, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and no, I mean, okay, so the counseling program is run out of education. It runs a little bit differently. I don't think, Hannah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they need a supervisor before they apply to that program.
Well, not the counseling, but if they apply to like the MSc or the MA in psych.
Right.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
get
yeah,
a
yeah,
supervisor
exactly.
later, Mark,
Yeah.
you're right,
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
counseling.
For the
Yeah, so if
counseling,
you're,
yeah.
exactly. So if you're applying to the counseling program, so it's really important to look at the application requirements for the program you're interested in. If you're interested in the counseling program, you don't need a supervisor at the time of application. If you're interested in psychology or neuroscience, you do, and then you're going to be in that department with the supervisor that that you've chosen. We have really relatively few people cross-appointed across departments at the University of Lethbridge. So generally speaking, you know, with very few exceptions, your supervisor will determine what department you're in and and to some extent what your major is. There's a little bit of flexibility there, but especially in the PhD where we have these multidisciplinary PhDs. But as a general rule, the department, your supervisor determines your department and your major.
It is the case, though, that psychology faculty occasionally supervise a student within the counseling program. But I wonder if this student is also more asking about having input from other supervisors from other departments. So it is worth mentioning that in graduate programs, you have a supervisory team. That's what we call it here, right, Mark? Yeah. supervisory committees. So the members of your committee, it's actually relatively common, correct me if I'm wrong, that they could be from other parts of other departments.
Yep, almost all of my departments, almost all of my students, sorry, have a supervisory committee member from another department. And the other thing too is that if it's appropriate, sometimes students have co-supervisors and they are often from two different departments.
Thank you so much for that. So we're coming to the end. Wait, I think we got one last question. I was wondering about that because I applied to the MEd and it didn't require a supervisor. And at the time when I applied, so I was concerned. So they said, thanks for your clarification. So that helped them. Is it necessary for me to highlight my experience and achievements in a field that is not related to a professor's research interest just to show my ability to succeed during my graduate studies? Craig, you wanna take that one?
Yeah, I would stand on be careful there. Be careful there is my strong advice. That indication that you've had success in an unrelated area is not the best indicator of success in an area that you're going to be pursuing. I mean, yes, you can finish things. This is important. That's evaluated actually as part of the entrance requirement. Somebody has to say, how do they do for completion? But so it does give a demonstration that you're able to get things done. That's great. I mean, I get this one a lot actually because my specific area that I study in the sciences is a little esoteric, even within the country. It's unusual to have people that do what I do. Most people that are in my area do applied research, and I don't. So if somebody comes in and they're highlighting all this applied research that they did, it's unimpressive to me. It's like, yeah, so so focus on how you fit with that person's goals, what's driving you towards contacting them. So that's your passion. And then tell me something that leads me to want to continue to deepen that conversation. And I mean, if it organically comes up perhaps in a second email that you say, well, yeah, I mean, I've done a bunch of research work. So for me as a geographer, if you're out and you can say, yeah, I mean, I've spent time in the field doing X, Y, and Z, there may be some intersection there for us, some way to talk about things. But yeah, be careful with that one.
I would just add, yeah, if it demonstrates competency and relevant skills, then you can, in moderation, at least highlight achievements you may have made, outside the particular field you want to study in. Like, again, I'm speaking as a historian, but I may have a student apply and say, I did my minor, I don't know, in philosophy, and I wrote a paper on Hegel that won an award or whatever. Now, I'm an ancient historian, so no student I supervise, we're never going to do work on Hegel that I foresee. But, being able to write an excellent paper like that does demonstrate writing and research skills that are, quite applicable to writing a history paper as well. So something like that, again, if it demonstrates relevant competency, then I think that's fine.
Yeah, and I think some of those things that might be impressive, I think Craig and Chris are right. Like if it comes up in a follow-up, so for example, at some point I'll ask you for a resume or a CV, and you might put something in there that catches my attention because it shows that you're so I'll give you an odd example. Actually, there's a student in the lab next door to mine who is a competition level piano player, right? I mean, we're scientists, right? So it's not like this is relevant. But the thing is, it shows, the fact that this student performs at that level in piano shows that this person's able to focus on something and really, really, devote themselves to something. It's not something that, the student probably needed to bring up when they first talked with their eventual supervisor about doing graduate studies. But it's something that might, you might see it on a resume and I'll go, oh, that's cool. That's interesting, right? And maybe something we talk about later. What did you learn, from that experience that you can bring to my lab, right? So you never know, but it's not something that if it's not kind of in your initial letter should really be focusing on, you're doing this, I'm interested in this, here's how they fit together, and then the other stuff will develop.
Thank you so much, Mark. And we've come to an end. I want to thank everyone, our esteemed panelists, for taking the time to help me host this webinar to assist our prospective students in their path to securing a supervisor and what to do and what not to do. I hope the information that they've shared was extremely helpful and that you are able to know what it is that you should be doing and when you should be approaching your supervisors to get into your master's programs.